Let's do our first hands-on. And in this hands-on, there would be three components. Obviously, you'll have the Python Flask program. Would create a very basic Python Flask program, and I would try to run it in localhost port number 5000. And I have a CSV file which contains the product information. And from the client, using this endpoint, which is HTTP colon slash slash localhost colon 5000 slash the name of the API. So the name of the API would be exposed by the Python Flask program. The client can be a web browser or it can be a tool also. I'll tell you about the tool shortly. But the end goal of this hands-on is that whenever we use this API endpoint or the URL, it should go and execute the method which is tied or mapped to this API. And what it will do, it will read the file, the Python program will read the CSV file and return the records back to the web browser or the tool that we are going to use. This is the end goal of the first hands-on that we are going to do. All right. Typically what happens is that we use web browser or websites which are written in HTML or JavaScript, and we'll be having the Python Flask application, which is obviously currently running, would be in my machine. I'll use AWS Cloud later on. I will showcase the Python Flask application in AWS Cloud. If needed, I'll showcase it on EKS also. Anyway, so typically we'll have a website, and the website would be written either in HTML or JavaScript or using both. So this is the server which would be running on localhost port number 5000. So the website would make a call to the API whenever a button is pressed or a link is pressed. For example, whatever I have shown you in the real life examples, whenever you click on something which has a link, essentially it makes a call to the API. So it uses an API to make a call and then gets the response back. So what am I going to do is that I'll be using a separate tool for this, because I want to show you the API part of it, not the website part. So I'll be using a tool called Postman. So this Postman would be used to send API request to the Python Flask application that is running on my machine. And the Postman tool or the Postman application would also run on my machine, and it would work as a client. Now, instead of the HTML or web application or the JavaScript page, the Postman client or the Postman application would send the request to the Python Flask application that is running on my machine and then get the response back. So both of them would be running on my machine. Postman application would be the client and Python application running on my machine would be the server. So both client and server are on the same machine. And I'll use this setup for most of the hands-on unless I am doing it in the cloud. So what are the steps that you have to do? You'll have to install Postman. Then I'll write the Python code to return a static output. And I'll use Flask to expose the API. The API would return the static output. So I'll use Postman to send the API request and get the response. I can change the port from 5000 to 8000 and run it again. And at the end of it, I'll use two different APIs using the same program. So I'll be exposing two APIs using the same Python Flask application. The Python program would read a file, a CSV file rather, which contains product information. Initially, it will list all the products, then we'll see whether we can get details of a product or not. And as mentioned, all the details should be taken from a file. All right, so let me show you the setup. This is the Python Flask program. The name of the program is product API from file.py. So this is the name of the program. And I have a CSV file which contains 8 products. This is the product ID, this is a product name and some other information. It is a CSV file, but there is no header. I have kept the header in a separate file named data_file_header. So I'll use this CSV file and I'll send the information which is there in the CSV file to using the API. So that is the first exercise. Let's go ahead and do that first, and then we'll see whether we can send request using product ID or not. All right, this is the boilerplate code. We have imported the Flask class from Flask module, and I have instantiated an object named app using the class Flask and passing the argument dunder name dunder. and then I'm using this app.run if it is getting run from the main Python application. Now what am I going to do is that I'll improvise this code so that this code reads this file, product, retail product data, and displays the output. As you know, I'll have to define a function. So let us go ahead and define a function. I'll name the function as list product, which will read the file retail product data, which is in the same folder as that of the code. Just let me just show you. So this is the project API using Python Flask, and inside of it I have created this program product API from file, and the retail product data is there in the same folder. So of course I'm opening this file, and now what will I do is that I'll read all the lines from this file. There's nothing new in it. I have already shown you this in the Python basics. In the first go, I'll not return anything. Let's keep it as is. Let's try to print the line. I'll print each and every line. Let's see whether it runs or not. All right, now I'm using this app.run to execute the program. So now if I execute this, the Python Flask program would start executing. So let's click on play. Now if you see, the output is a little different. It is not printing anything. What it is telling you is that this particular application is running on http://127.0.0.1.5000. So let's try it out. I'll copy this, run it using Google Chrome, and it says the requested URL was not found on the server. So why it was not found? I'm passing this /, even then it is not found. It is giving you an error. The problem here is that I have not mapped the API with this particular function. The name of the function is list product. I have not mapped it. So that's why we are getting this error that the requested URL was not found. And now I'll use this decorator @app.route, and here I'll pass maybe the /. After doing this, what is happening is that this particular path, which is basically the API, would be listing all the product. But instead of this plain path, let me type list product. Now if I type /list product, it should do something. The program should execute. Now I'll append list product here. It's giving the same output that the requested URL was not found. So what is the error? We do not see any error here. We see some HTTP 404 error. So what is HTTP 404? HTTP 404 error means that the server can't locate the requested resource like a web page or a specified URL due to some problem. We know that this is an error, but why the problem is? So for that, you can use something called debug mode. So you can type debug equals to true. Now what would happen? You can stop this program and start it back again. Now it would start in debug mode on with the same endpoint. So it says there's some error. The error is a type error. The view function for list product did not return a valid response. The function either returned none or ended without a return statement. So it's pretty straightforward why we got the error. It says that the function ended without a return statement. One more thing is, it says something called a view function rather than a function. Why it is called a view function? Because in web applications or web services, the functions that we create, those are essentially meant to be viewed by an HTML page or a web page. That's why it is called a view function. But that's fine. Even if you are not showing it in a web page, that is perfectly fine. Even then it would be called as a view function. So you got the error. I cannot run print statement. I'll have to return something. So let me go ahead and return the entire line. So now I'm returning the lines. So it has changed something and the change has been captured dynamically. Let's run the program again. So now as you can see, it is showing me the output, the product ID, the product information, I guess, or product name, whatever, and the other information as well in an array. That's what it is returning. Now, obviously, this is not a good way to see or get a response. It should be put in a JSON, or I should actually filter it out and then return it. Let's try to change the program, right? Now, before I change the program, let's try to check a few things. So I'm running it in 127.0.0.1. Let's try localhost, and it is saying that access to localhost was denied. Why that is the case? Because by default, we do not get access to all the endpoints. We have to make changes in Flask. So here, I'll have to mention something called host equal to. You can actually type the IP address, but instead of that, if you mention 0000, what it would do is that it would tell Flask that you can run this particular application in all the available IPs of this particular machine, of the local machine. Okay, so we can do that. I'll stop this and start it back again. And it says that port 5000 is already in use. So it is getting used by the other program, which is the default Flask program. So you'll have to change the port number also. Let's see whether port number 6000 works or not. So in the hands-on exercise, I had mentioned that would change the port number from 5000 to 8000, but instead of that, I'm changing it to 6000. 5000 did not work because by default, Flask application runs on 5000. So the moment I added this host, it gave me this error because 5000 is actually allocated for Flask. So let's try to run it using port number 6000. So now it says that the application is running on 127.0.0.1 and 192.168.1.7.6000. This is the private IP address of my laptop, and this is the loopback IP address. If you don't know what loopback IP address is, this is actually the IP address for local host. Okay, so now let us go ahead and try with both these IP addresses. 127.0.0.1, it's not 5000, it should be 6000. Okay, it says that it cannot be reached. What might be the problem? Let's try the private IP address also. Even then it is giving some error. It's not very obvious why the error, why we are getting this error. And you have debug mode on also. Even in debug mode on, it is not showing anything. So debug mode would work only if the problem is in the application, in the Flask application. So it seems like the error is not in the Flask application. So the API is not even coming to the program. The program is not even getting executed. Otherwise, would have got some output here. So let's try to change the port to 8000, and it has been changed. Let's try it out now. Sorry, let's stop and start it back again and try it out now. As you can see, it is working now, right? So the moment we change the port, it started working, and this is the same output that we were getting earlier also. The reason it was not working, maybe port number 6000 was getting used by some other application. And if I use, let's say 127.0.0.1, it should work as is. So it is showing you the output, which is all the rows in that particular file. Let's try localhost now. Localhost is also working, and as you can see, it again, it's the same output, right? Now what will you do is that we'll make some change. This is the header, right? So we have product ID, product name. So I do not want all of it. I just want the product ID and product name. That's it. So what will I do? I'll have to send that in a dictionary. This is not a Flask concept. This is a Python concept. So we'll not use return JSONify. We'll send actual variables. And what will you do is that we'll pass the variable maybe in JSON or something, right? So I will just capture the product ID, which is I.split, and the first element, and the product name, the second element. Why have I done it? Why have I used this I.split and first element and second element? Because there is a CSV file. So whenever Python reads the file, it's a string. By default, it captures the records in string. Now, if we split it, it would become an array. So I want to get the first element and the second element, which is product ID and product name. And let's go ahead and return the product ID and product name. Let's try this out. The changes have been captured and the reloading was done. If you change the port, you'll have to stop the program and start it back again. It will not happen dynamically. Okay, so let's run it. It is showing only 4950. So let's see what 4950 is. Seems like 4950 is the last product ID of the last record. So there is some problem. Obviously, we cannot send it as is. So what will I do is that I'll capture these two in a dictionary and then send it in the dictionary. Let me initialize a dictionary, and this is how we initialize a dictionary. Or let me capture these variables in dictionary variables. So items product ID would be the first product, and items product name would be the product name. And now I'll return items. Let's see what happens. Okay, the changes are done and it has been reloaded. Let's execute. So at least there's some output. I can see the product ID and the product name, but I don't see all the product IDs and all the product name. Why that is the case? I think you already know that using the return items at the end. So once the loop is over, then I'm using this return items. Will it work if I place it here? Let's try it out. We'll try everything possible. And let's execute this again. I'm not getting the same output, right? It's 4278. So what is 4278? It is the first, last, or middle one. So seems like that is the first record. Now why it is happening? Because whenever you define a function and the moment you return something from the function ends. So I cannot use return items here. So what is the other way around? Let me go ahead and maybe put it in a list and append it in items list, and it will be items. Let's see whether it works or not. I don't think it will work because of a certain Python characteristic here, but let's see. All right. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 records. Let me just zoom it out. So we have 8 records, but all of them have the same records: 4950, 4950, etc. Okay, and what is this 4950 and Huntington Bank Shares Incorporated? Let's look at the file, which is the last record. The loop is working, the append is also working, but every time it is printing the last record. Why that is the case? Let's try to debug it. I had already shown you debugging in the Python basics, so let me go ahead and extend that. But obviously we cannot debug it in Flask mode, so I'll have to stop it and remove all the Flask code that I have. So I'll comment out all the Flask code and call, let's say, list product function, right? So now it's a plain and simple program. What it is doing, it is just executing this function. Now this is not a Flask code anymore, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and debug it. But before debugging, you'll have to capture the breaking points. So what will I do is that I'll keep it in the for loop, and that's it, I guess. Okay, so you already know how to debug it. We'll have to use the console. The console would automatically open here. We can right click and mention debug this, or we can click on this bug item. Okay, so this is the console, right? Let me expand it. I hope you can see it. And this is the button which will take me to the next breakpoint. So now it has come to the next breakpoint. I had mentioned 2 breakpoints. This is the first one and this is the second one. All right, so look at this particular section, which is the terminal. Okay, next line, items product ID, which is fine. Now I contains certain value. This is the value of I, which is the entire line. And after this line is executed, items product ID contains 4267, which is correct. Then items product name contains Bloom Energy Corporation, which is also correct. So item is an array. Now it has been appended. Now if I execute this, right, if I go to the next loop, it will be appended to items list. So if you see items list, it has product ID 4278 and product name Bloom Energy Corporation. All good so far. Let's go to the next step again. So item ID would be having 4371. Okay, now if you see, product ID is 4371 and product name is, I think, Orthopediatrics Corp. If I execute this, yeah, Orthopediatrics Corp. Now the item list has also changed. And if I execute again, the append is actually working, but the product got changed to the second record. Why it is the case? Now this is not a Flask problem, this is a Python problem. The problem is that if you remember, Python actually points to the memory location, right? So this is an empty dictionary and this is a memory location. This is getting stored in memory, and whenever we update, this is an update of a dictionary item. It is updating the location. So that's why it is getting changed. So how do we fix it? There's a way to do it, and you can use something called copy. I did not mention this earlier. So now what would happen is that the copy would be saved, not the actual array. So the copy of the array would be appended, not the memory location. Now, if I execute it now in debug mode, okay, I removed the breakpoint, sorry. Okay, so let's execute. For lines, item ID should be product ID, then product name, fine. Item list is product ID 4278 and product name is Bloom Energy. Let's go to the next one, which is 4371 and Orthopediatrics Corp. Let's press next. Product ID got changed here, 4371, but in the items list, it was not changed. So I think we are fixed. Okay, so now items list has product ID 4278 rather, and then 4371. So we are fixed now. It is working, and now I'll remove the breakpoints and start it as a Flask application. We'll run it in port number 8000. Let's execute. It is getting executed. Now I should be able to see all the products. So as you can see, we have product ID 4278, then 4371. So it has changed. It is listing me all the products. So this was the first exercise, or the first API rather. Now as per the hands-on instruction, the second API should be to get a details of a product. Now how do you get the details of a product? If I go to the file, to get a details of a product, we'll have to pass the product ID. Now how do I pass the product ID? So here I just have the API, I do not have any arguments. Seems like we'll have to pass arguments. So that is the next topic of discussion. But before that, I want to show you this in Postman also, using Postman, which we'll be using the most. And this is the Postman application. If you have installed it for the first time, go to home and you'll get something like send an API request. So this is send an API request. Click on new request. Now you can send an API request by pasting the URL. And here we have all the HTTP methods that I talked about. We have get, we have post, we have put. I did not talk about patch, delete, head or options. That's fine. We'll be using mostly get, post and put. But anyway, what I have to do is that I'll have to use the same endpoint. Now here what am I doing is that I'm using the same API, which is localhost :8000 list product. I'll have to send it to the server, and this is the output that we're getting. Now we can use other IP address also, either 127.0.0.1 or something else as well. Even if I use 127.0.0.1, we'll get the same output. So I've shown you using Postman and I have shown you using browser. So let's go to the next topic, which is passing arguments or passing variables.